See you all again. And appreciate Barry's prayers to be brought back, because obviously when we went on holiday there were no problems. It was fine. And we'd actually just accepted the flight that they'd suggested, which was a bit of a hard slog, because it was straight through, so it was 10.5 to 11 hours, and I was like, not looking forward to that, but we just took the one that they offered because we thought it was part of the holiday. And then it actually turned out that we were probably one of the few who got home on the day they should get home and didn't have any problems. So God sorted that before we even needed that. We knew that we needed to ask for it. And many of the group changed it was a tour group, many of the group changed their flights because they didn't want to come back straight away. And a lot of them are now trying to come back today and are booked to come through Dubai and are not going to get home. So I think God was ahead of us on that one. And it's nothing at all to do with the sermon, but I thought you just might like to know this story, because part of the holiday, one of the best bits of the holiday was going to the elephant sanctuary. And there was, at the very end, the teenage elephants, who were still pretty big, but not enormous, were behind us for a group photo. And I do not have photographic evidence of this because I was in the group photo, but they really took a liking to Robin. And as he stood on the back row of people and the elephants behind him, this trunk snaked up and patted him on the head. And the first time I saw it, I thought that was a bit strange, and then it came up again and did it again. And for the whole time they tried to take a group photo, this elephant repeatedly patted Robin on the head, and I couldn't work out whether to show some concern because it looked quite rough, or to think, was it because he was the tallest in the group and they just thought, oh, it's our height? Or have they adopted him? And I'm not ashamed to say, but I resorted to fits of giggles and left him to it. But I thought you'd like to know that. So, but the story that Debbie's just read to us beautifully is one that you know really well, and one that you will have heard lots of sermons on. And in fact, I've got a feeling that in one of Robin's more recent sermons, he even referred to it or used this chapter. But sometimes it's good to look at things that we think we know and try and see things in a different light, isn't it? So we have Jairus. We start with him. Now, he's a synagogue leader, so he would have been responsible for the service. He would have been our Barry this morning. He would have kept the scroll because in the Jewish services, the scroll was really important, and I think that it was carried into the service. So he would have kept that, he would have cared for that. He would have instructed the boys, which slightly different, not quite maybe the same as we think of Sunday school, is not keeping them happy whilst the adults enjoy their service. He's instructing them, ready for them to become men, and teaching them the Bible and teaching them from the Torah, and ready for that moment where they step over from boyhood to manhood. He would have also been responsible for the care of the needy. So if there was money to be given out or food to be given out, or people came in need to the synagogue, would have been his job to sort that. So that would have been his role. He was a man of authority. But he reaches a point in his life where he needs more. He's got a daughter, a little girl at home. Well, she's not actually a little girl because she's 12. And although we all know lots about boys, Jewish boys becoming 13 and becoming men, actually girls, it was the same. So at 12, she's on the threshold of becoming a woman. And so it would have been an important time in her life, an important time for the parents. And suddenly, she's dying. And he has to find a higher authority, someone who has more than him to go to. And we don't know why he came to Jesus. We don't know if he'd heard of Jesus or been following him, or, what had led him. Because in fact, many of the other people in his profession, many of the Pharisees and the scribes and the other Jewish religious leaders were against Jesus. But he comes looking for Jesus. It says that he threw himself to his knees to ask and pleaded with him. He fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house. Well, that's real humility, isn't it? Because I guess that the people that were watching knew who he was and knew that he was an important religious leader, but still he has the humility to fall to his knees and to plead for his daughter's life. And Jesus was going to go, it says, as Jesus was on his way. But along comes another incident, along comes someone else. And this time it's a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years. And she's tried to be healed. She's gone her own way. She's tried doctors. Nothing's worked. No one's been able to heal her. Not she would, as a Jewish woman, she was ceremonially unclean for 12 whole years. This meant, amongst probably other things as well, but the ones that I found was, she couldn't enter the temple. She couldn't be intimate with anyone. Anything she touched, and that included the things that she sat on, became unclean. So any person who touched her was unclean. And there was different sets of rules. So the things that she sat on were unclean. No one else could go sit there or near her or with her until all those things had been cleaned and washed. If a man touched her, he was unclean for the rest of the day. Everything had its own little set of rules depending on who it was or what it was. Can you imagine living life like that for 12 years? Can you imagine that no one could take her hand or put their hand on her shoulder? No touch, no going to church for 12 years, no entering the temple for 12 years. I think she would have been pretty desperate. And again, we don't know how she came to believe that if she could touch Jesus, she would be healed. We don't know her story before. We don't know if she had also met someone who'd been healed or heard Jesus' teaching. But she got it in her head that if she could just touch the hem of his robe, she would be healed. The commentaries say that, the crowds was such that, well, it says in verse 42 that the crowds almost crushed Jesus. So how on earth she fought her way through to touch the hem of his garment, we can only imagine. And do you know that what would have been at the very hem of his garment would have been the tassels that represent the Torah? So she would have reached out and touched the part that represented the Word of God. And she pushed through that crowd, and she managed to do that, and she was healed. And then the Bible says immediately her bleeding stopped, so she knew she'd been healed. But equally, Jesus knew he'd been touched and that something had happened, and he starts questioning it. Now, really what she wanted to do was slide away unnoticed, quietly, just go. She'd got her healing, she wanted to leave. We don't know if that was because she was scared, because I think that if you'd spent 12 years probably being shooed away by people, don't you come near me, you would get a bit scared. Also, technically, if there were Pharisees around, she just made Jesus unclean because she touched his robe. So she could have been scared. She could have just not had enough self-worth to wait around and thought, I need to get out of here. We don't know that, but she wants to go off unnoticed and then realises that's not going to work because Jesus is insistent, who touched me? And verse 47 says that the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. And here's a little link, isn't there, into Jairus' story, because this is two of them and they both have reacted to Jesus by falling at his feet with humility, by acknowledging that he is more than what they are, even though that's in different ways, because for Jairus, he's fallen at Jesus' feet as a sign that Jesus is a man of more spiritual authority than him, and she's falling at Jesus' feet because Jesus has given her what no one else has been able to, healing. So why does Jesus be so insistent and call her back? Well, I looked in the commentaries because I didn't know either. And there's a thread through them that talks about how Jesus brings her to a place where she has to share her testimony and own her faith. And the Bible says, in the presence of all, she tells her story. I think that's really interesting because she would have reached out and received her healing and then she would have gone away. And Jesus brings her back and makes her share it. And that's a bit of a challenge. That's one of the challenges to us, isn't it? Because how often do we not speak out either words of testimony when Jesus does something, or words when we learn something that does something inside us that helps us grow, or words of when we have the opportunity to evangelize? The speaking out must have been really important. And the speaking out leads to her receiving peace. Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." So her physically reaching out and touching results in her receiving the physical healing, but her speaking out results in her receiving peace, spiritual healing. It's like Jesus knew that touching the garment and the physical healing wasn't all she needed. There was more for her. And if she'd scurried away unnoticed, she wouldn't have got the rest. And so there's another challenge for us, isn't there, as well, about taking our time with Jesus and being willing to wait and see what else there is for us. And do you know that she is the only person, the only woman that Jesus calls daughter? When you look at all the other stories, even to his mum, he calls her woman. And it's not like it is now. You know, if somebody says to you, "Hey, woman, come over here," you'd be a bit offended. It wasn't the case then. It was okay to be referred to as woman. But this is the one that he calls daughter. Now, if we keep sort of going through the story verse by verse, you see Jairus' story has got forgotten and he's been left on the side. See, Jesus started off to go for him, but got sidetracked to move into this encounter with this woman. So Jairus has been watching and hearing all this and waiting for Jesus. And his servant arrives and says, "Your daughter's dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore." The delay in healing the woman with the bleeding cost Jairus' daughter her life. How would you feel if you were Jairus at that point? I mean, how do you feel anyway when you see someone's prayers being answered and yours remain unanswered? Or you see blessings poured out on one person and you continue to struggle? And also, this servant says, "Your daughter's dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore." So there was faith for healing because he knew where to find Jairus. So he knew that Jairus had come to ask Jesus for healing. So there was faith for healing, but there isn't faith for resurrection. Because as far as the messenger's concerned, stories ended. No faith for resurrection. And sometimes that's the same for us, because we can have faith. It's easier, isn't it, to have faith for things that you've seen before. So if you've prayed for something, maybe you've prayed for healing for someone and you've seen them healed. When you pray for healing for the next person, that's easier to have faith for. But when God puts you in the position of needing faith for something you've never seen or done before, so the first time God challenges you to be behind the microphone doing something you've never done before, that's new faith. That's faith you've never exercised before. That will probably be much harder to have faith for than doing something you've done lots of times. You see, there isn't, when we get to the end of the story and Jesus and the disciples see the little girl raised to life, there's not much reaction from them because the disciples had already seen a resurrection. They've been there. But there's lots of times as we walk with Jesus where we need to learn, we need to exercise faith in a way we've never done before. And that's scary. But in our story, Jesus goes to the house. He says to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." And Jairus' feelings and emotions must have been in turmoil, must have been because this man that he had sought out, because he had the spiritual authority that Jairus himself didn't have, is coming to the house, but he's coming to a dead child. And it's different. But Jesus goes. And he takes the disciples in and the child's father and mother. And all the people are wailing and mourning. And he says, "Stop wailing. She's not dead. She's asleep." And they laughed at him. It says knowing that she was dead because they've seen that. That's their experience, that this child is dead. And it also could partly be that they could have been hired mourners and not really have cared, which is something we don't get our head around very well. But Jesus takes her by the hand and says, "My child, get up." And her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. And Jairus receives back his daughter. And whenever we look at stories, and bits and stories in the Bible, I think that we're meant to ask, where are we? And where do we find ourselves in this? Which bit of it relates to us? You see, because the woman was a woman who had tried to find her own way. As much as she could. We don't know how rich she was, but we know that she'd spent, some of the accounts tell us that she'd spent all she had on doctors and it had not worked, so she'd gone her own way. Both of them needed humility. Both of them needed to be in the place where Jesus was the only answer. And that's a place we often find it hard to be in, because we just want to try one more thing, or we just want to give it a bit more time, or we just want to help God along a bit. Did you know that Jairus' name means "he will awake"? I love it when there's a few names when you look through the Bible and it's like their names are going to fit their story, but their parents didn't know that when they named them. And there's Jairus, who's been in a dead religion, probably enforcing rules and regulations on other people, and we all know, I don't have to explain, you know what a Pharisee was. And his name is "he will awaken," and he has an encounter with Jesus like this, a powerful one where his daughter is brought back to life. I think that guy awoke spiritually that day. But sometimes things need awakening in us as well. Things that we've sort of Sometimes we're challenged and we need that new faith. Sometimes things that we have squashed down and laid dormant need awakening. Sometimes things need awakening in us too. And no matter who we are, we're not treated any differently to these two people. These people were completely different, but they were both welcomed, they were loved, they were healed and restored. And I think we could say that maybe both received more than they asked for. And could they go back to life as it was before? I doubt it, because every time Jairus saw his daughter, and as she grew and she would marry and she would have children and all those milestones, he would know one day this daughter was dead. And that man Jesus came and took her hand and said, "Wake up, child." And that woman who has spent 12 years with not even being able to sit, I don't know what, they wouldn't have had a sofa there, but let's say sofa, to sit on the sofa next to someone, not even being able to do that, her life would be completely changed. And that's what should happen when we have an encounter with Jesus. We shouldn't go back the same. And so, if there's a challenge in there today that God went, "That's yours," then don't ignore it. Pick it up and take it to him, because I'm really sure that you'll get more than you are asking for.